Test one, test one.
صباح الخير. صباح الخير جميعا وأهلا بكم في هذه الندوة بعنوان بعد عامين.
Good morning and welcome to this workshop entitled Periods of Genocide and the Future of Palestinian People to Self-Determination. We are meeting today as Gaza remains, after 2 years of the beginning of the genocide, continues to live their disastrous impact. The pain did not stop with the ceasefire. The siege is still imposed. Starvation continues to be a deliberate policy. The population are facing daily systematic destruction that affected people, buildings, and social structure.
Recording in progress.
Genocide and reality, new resolutions are made one after the other since the beginning of the previous century to decide the future of the Palestinians without their participation. Decisions that start with the mandate and end yesterday with a new resolution that was announced at the Security Council that continues to deal with Palestine as the Palestinians as if it is a problem that is being managed by the Security Council and not as a population that has an inherent and inalienable right to self-determination. Under such circumstances, we are proposing today the so-called Trump peace plan, which presents Gaza as a region under international custody, which is a colonial regime that is illegal and illegitimate. It deprives the Palestinian people of its inherent right to self-determination. Thus, understanding the legal and political dimensions of this era becomes a necessity rather than a choice. The protection of the Palestinian narrative and reiterating that the voice of Palestine for the Palestinians is a national duty becomes paramount. We are meeting today at Birzeit University and through virtual space in this joint workshop joined by the Faculty of Law and Public Administration in January, the Organization for Life for Palestine, and the Independent Commission for Human Rights. We are meeting today to analyze with responsibility and in depth what Palestine is currently facing and what future awaits us. Before we start, we stand in a minute of silence for the souls of our martyrs in Palestine and across Gaza. Thank you. Now we have an opening remark with the president of Birzeit University, Professor Talal Shahwan. The floor is yours. Good morning. Esteemed ladies and gentlemen, welcome at Birzeit University. And thank you to our partners for organizing this meeting, the Independent Commission for Human Rights and the Organization of Law for Palestine. We are convening today at a very sensitive time after over 2 years and 1 month of the beginning of genocide against Gaza, during which the university held several meetings and workshops. We tried through them to read the happenings in Gaza from different angles, whether they be legal, political, or humanitarian, economic, and epistemological. But what is more important to all of us is hosting our colleagues from Gaza, who carried to us the testimony, voice, knowledge, and experience. We listened to them to understand and to ask genuine questions. What can Birzeit University part of the meeting today continues on this path and also shifts to a question: how can we understand our legal and political reality under a colonial system that continues to renew itself? The more important question could be, what will happen next? What is our role? What position can a Palestinian university occupy in times when the future of an entire population is being reshaped? At Birzeit University, we believe that the university is not a place to produce diplomas, but rather to produce awareness. We believe in emancipatory education, education that does not only repeat existing models and is not limited to their curricula taught, an education that does not deal with knowledge as a neutral thing that is dissociated from reality. We aspire for an education that places humans, especially oppressed humans, in the center. It is an education that understands that knowledge is not an academic luxury, but a condition for freedom. Therefore, Palestine, with its still ongoing colonial experience, becomes the epistemological and moral compass for our mission at the university. What we are discussing today about genocide, annexation, and apartheid, and the plans of custody over Gaza are not political plans, but this is a question about the very essence of international system in which we are functioning. It is a question about the limitations of law and the role of academic and human rights organizations in confronting injustice. The role of Birzeit University in this context is not to give ready answers, but to create room for critical discussion, to produce new ideas, to empower students and researchers to read the reality using more in-depth and broader tools. Our role is to keep our voice risen at the knowledge level, to keep it independent, and to contribute to building a Palestinian narrative that redefines itself and its correlation with the world. In conclusion, I wish to thank you for your participation, and I hope that this conference will be an additional step toward a better understanding and more room to think and reflect on
Recording in progress.
بفعالية ناجحة ومثمرة.
شكرا دكتور طلال. والآن مع رئيس الهيئة المستقلة لحقوق الإنسان دكتور عمار دويك.
صباح الخير. شكرا جزيلا دكتورة هالة، سعادة الدكتور طلال شهوان رئيس جامعة بيرزيت، زملائي المتحدثين، الإخوة الأخوات، مشاركين مشاركات. في البداية اسمحوا لي بأن أتوجه إليكم بالاعتذار لعدم حضوري شخصيا معكم في بيرزيت. كان عندي سفير حقوق الإنسان الهولندي وغادر قبل قليل، فيعني حتى لا يضيع الوقت في الطريق أثرت المشاركة عبر زوم. أرجو قبول اعتذاري. طبعا كما ذكر الدكتور طلال، هذه لحظة تاريخية وحساسة جدا، وقد تكون غير مسبوقة في التاريخ المعاصر لفلسطين اللي بنمر فيها. لحظة تتقاطع فيها الإبادة والضم والفصل العنصري وآثارها الخطيرة، والتي وقف القانون الدولي أمامها عاجزا، مع في ذات الوقت حراك دولي غير مسبوق، حراك حقوقي وقانوني لدعم فلسطين. وهذا الحراك يواجه بهجوم على أسس القانون الدولي ذاته وعلى أدواته الأساسية. فعلى مدار العامين الماضيين شهد العالم حراكا دوليا غير مسبوق أعاد فلسطين وقضية فلسطين إلى مركز الاهتمام الدولي والقانون الدولي. صدر الرأي الاستشاري التاريخي في يوليو 2024 حول عدم شرعية الاحتلال وضرورة إنهائه والتعويض. هناك قضايا مرفوعة الآن ضد دولة الاحتلال بارتكابها جريمة الإبادة الجماعية، وضد دول أخرى لاتهامها بالتواطؤ في الإبادة الجماعية، ووصولا إلى صدور مذكرات اعتقال عن المحكمة الجنائية الدولية بحق مسؤولين كبار إسرائيليين، ونتوقع أن تصدر أيضا مذكرات اعتقال أخرى. أيضا هناك تطورات وحراك تحيي الأمل واختراقات مهمة. دول تعترف بفلسطين، منها 4 دول
that are recognizing Palestine, 4 of who are permanent members of the UN Security Council, and other states have prevented or imposed sanctions on the armament of Israel or sending weapons. Sending weapons. There is a solidarity, an international solidarity wave that the law is not a political choice, but a commitment. This action did not come out of the blue. Actually, it was based, or it was due to the Israeli genocide and annihilation against the Palestinians that were in front of the rest of across the world. And which is more important than that is the resilience and steadfastness of our population against this genocide. This rising accountability to have brought the Palestinian human rights and the international arena for the first time, and to face the impunity and to open a serious door for accountability for the Israeli perpetrators who commit the genocide. This great hopeful transformation that faces huge challenges. There is an unprecedented attack on the basis of the international law, despite the weakness that we are all aware of, and the international law institutions, even though sometimes they are inactive because of the attack that is subjected to, and for the human rights and international law defenders, there is an attack against the ICC. They're imposing sanctions on it and on those who provided with information. There are sanctions on the special rapporteur on the Palestinian and occupied Palestinian territories, Francisca Benitez. There is a classification of 3 law institutions in Palestine who have been placed on the economic sanctions list, and there's a 4th important institution that is on the terrorism list. This context needs to be through seeing the vision of what happened yesterday in the UN Security Council, the context of trying to undermine the basis of international law, replacing it by political initiatives, arduous attempts or initiatives to re-engineer the international law and to exclude the International Court of Justice and to weaken the Palestinian right to self-determination. Our responsibilities as law institutions and experts nowadays is to challenge this attack against the international law and to improve our tools and discourse and to maintain our independence and to reject any attempts to criminalize or to undermine the legal law work. So as we evaluate, we need to evaluate any resolutions or decisions within the framework of the international justice principles without symposium today. It's not an academic symposium merely. It's a space to reaffirm the status of the international law and to correct the international narrative. It's an initiative to dismantle the colonization control and to the construction and also to revive the Palestinians' right to self-determination. As Palestinians, there is one lesson that we should have learned based on all the settlement and negotiation failure that we have gone through and the peace attempts and the necessity to insist that any procedures or any solutions or resolutions should be based on rights, based on the international law principles and rules, so that international law is a framework that guides and controls such political solutions or decisions, and the dignity of the human being should be in the center or in the core of such principles. This is something that the UN Security Council stressed yesterday. Finally, to conclude, I would like to thank our partners who have always been present in this dark scene and this genocide at the international and local level. BZU that we are all proud of, who coordinates the law for Palestine, the jurists for Palestine who are going through a struggle at all levels and especially in Europe. Thank you so much. And I would like also to thank all those who contributed to organizing this meeting, mainly our audience, our participants who came all the way from abroad, and those who are on the Zoom and from inside the Gaza Strip. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Ammar. And now we give the floor to the chairman of the board of the Institution of Law for Palestine, Dr. Ammar. Can you hear us?
Dr. Hala, you are muted.
شكرا.
Thank you.
شكرا دكتور عمار.
Thank you, Dr. Ammar. I hope you can hear us on Zoom now, and we give the floor to the chairman of the board of the Institution of Law for Palestine. Thank you, Dr. Hala, and welcome to everybody. Professor Talal Shahwan, President of ZU, Dr. Ammar Dweik, Director of the Independent Commission for Human Rights, esteemed audience, dear students and researchers, I am pleased to speak to you today on behalf of the Institution of Law for Palestine. We know that our organization is an international organization that is operating on the international level. It has been established in 2020. In the past 5 or 6 years, it has produced legal work to fill in the gaps in scientific research and defense for the right of Palestinians through international and local courts, and through carrying out profound studies and organizing conferences, symposia, and training that focus on developing international law and its correlation to the Palestinian question. In this meeting, we are pleased to organize this meeting in partnership with BZU and the Independent Commission for Human Rights, because as part of our strategies is to cooperate with Palestinian universities and to create, in cooperation with our colleagues, a network of legal researchers, Palestinian and international. This meeting, as previous speakers have said, comes in the aftermath of a resolution by the Security Council of the so-called International Peace Plan and the establishment of the World Peace Council. We as Palestinians have welcomed the ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, and we hope that the next phase will be better for the people of the Gaza Strip after 2 bitter years of genocide that remind us that what happens in Gaza may even be greater than what happened during the 1948 Nakba. This meeting and following meetings is only a beginning for further conferences and meetings, which I believe will continue for decades, to study and analyze what will be revealed to us among the tragedies and the grave violations of the international law, especially the genocide. The UN Security Council resolution is a repetition of the past. It reminds us of the Balfour Declaration, which was made without the consultation with the Palestinian people in 1917. At the time, the League of Nations tried to give legitimacy to this declaration by including it into the mandate power over Palestine. The colonial powers continue to use the same tools to control and hegemonize the Palestinian people. The resolution has clearly ignored the right of Palestinian people to self-determination and the creation of the Palestinian state. It has fully ignored the question of accountability for the violations and the crimes that have been committed over the past 2 years in the Gaza Strip. It separated clearly between the West Bank and the Gaza Strip and ignored the role of the PLO and Palestinian National Authority as a representative of the Palestinian people. It has not consulted the Palestinians regarding this resolution. There are many points that will be analyzed today to focus on the Trump plan. The symposium today comes at an era when the international law and its institutions are facing unprecedented attacks, as one mentioned by previous speakers. The ICC, which is there to sanction criminals, it is being attacked by the colonial powers that have contributed to the creation of the international law. But today they are fighting the same international law, when international law gives the Palestinian people its rights. Furthermore, ICJ has proven to be slow in its decision mechanisms. Its decisions, including the advisory opinion about the illegitimacy of the occupation, have not been respected even by the countries that have contributed to the creation of international law. International law is facing this unprecedented attack, which requires from us a review of the entire international system of this law. Thus comes the importance of this symposium and other meetings that have been organized and that will be organized by the Organization of Law for Palestine in Palestine and internationally. Therefore, I wish to the speakers and participants in the symposium a successful day and that it will pave the way toward a more in-depth discussion of international law and its correlation to Palestine. I wish to thank all the organizers, the Faculty of Law and Public Administration at Birzeit University, the Independent Commission for Human Rights, and I welcome all the participants from Palestine and abroad. And I wish you a successful day. Thank you.
شكرا دكتور معتز.
Thank you, Dr. Mu'taz. Thank you, Dr. Talal and Dr. Ammar. Now we will start with the first session. The speakers, please.
بسرعة بالترجمة أنا بقول مش عارفة هلا بنشوف. There is you. مكتوب رالف. صباح الخير.
Good morning.
I think we'll just proceed. We'll do in English, right? صباح الخير.
ستكون جلسة باللغة
رح نعمل
الإنجليزية.
الجلسة هاي بالإنجليزي.
So this session will be in English. So for the interpretation, please get the devices.
Welcome. My name is Zeina Jallad. I'm a
مرحبا،
professor
اسمي
of
زينة جلاد، دكتور في مديرة مركز دراسات الأراضي الفلسطينية وأستاذة مساعدة في القانون الدولي بالجامعة الأمريكية في بيروت. وأسعد أن أكون هنا في بيرزيت.
among friends and family, and it's a place that I care tremendously about. For today's session, what we'll do, we'll build on the intros that were provided by Dr. Talal, Dr. Mu'taz, and Dr. Ammar. And we'll work around the ideas of law and accountability under fire, genocide, annexation, and the Trump peace plan. The setup is simple. I'll introduce our speakers. They'll have 10 minutes. We'll do the framing, and then we'll open the floor for questions and discussions. The idea is really how can we engage with the aspects of their presentations and how we can work around the concepts that they'll be unpacking. So first, let's just build a bit on what was mentioned earlier on the idea of the moment that brings us together and which legal categories are we grappling with. So we meet today at a moment when international law is not simply being tested, it's being rewritten, hollowed out, and politically managed. We're grappling with genocide, annexation, apartheid, which are not metaphors. These are legal categories that carry obligation. Yet they are categories repeatedly flattened, diluted, and selectively suspended when it comes to the Palestinian people. What I'd like us to do today is really to work around the idea of Duncan Kennedy's work on the the essence of it on the neutrality of international law. And remember that law is never neutral. And this was framed by Dr. Ammar and Dr. Mu'taz. Law is never neutral. The interpretation is a choice. Enforcement is a choice. Silence is a choice. And the moment we're confronted with today is not of a legal absence. We do not lack international law. It's a moment defined by the deliberate choice to deny accountability. So our task, what we'll be working with today, is how can we unflatten the law, how we can pull apart these interpretive and political choices to think clearly about where enforcement fails, what forms of accountability remain possible in this moment that appears to be an impossible moment. Please join me in welcoming our speakers. We have Mr. Amjad Shawad, the director of the Palestinian Non-Governmental Organizations Network, PINGO, who's joining us via Zoom from Gaza. Ustaz Amjad will be talking to us about Gaza after genocide, voices from the ruins and the limits of international protection. Then we'll be joined by Dr. Munir Nsebe, the director of the Human Rights Clinic at Al-Quds University, who'll be unpacking annexation, fragmentation, apartheid, the erosion of Palestinian self-determination, while focusing on Jerusalem and the West Bank and the 1948 territories. Consequently, we'll be joined by Dr. Ralph Weil, who is a professor of international law at the University College of London, UCL. Ralph will talk about the Trump exclusionary plan, the peace plan, and the undermining of international law. And last but not least, we'll be joined by Ms. Melissa Donald, international lawyer and strategic advisor with extensive years of direct experience on working around the international law and where are the limits of international law, will be sharing with us her perspectives and takes on accountability for genocide and illegal occupation, the ICJ, ICC, corporations, and states' obligations. So welcome everyone. And we'll start with Mr. Amjad. Ustaz Amjad, أنت معنا.
شكرا جزيلا
صباح
الخير للجميع.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone.
يسعد صباحك.
Good morning.
ممكن زي ما اتفقنا نعمل presentations كل حدا فيكم إذا
Each
ممكن
one of you will
10
have
دقايق
up to 10 minutes to do their presentations, and then this will be followed by discussion. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
تحياتنا لكم من غزة.
Greetings from Gaza. I believe this symposium is the first one response to the UN Security Council's yesterday's resolution to emphasize the unity of the Palestinian people.
وهذا أمر بالغ الأهمية.
This is something very important. It's important to perpetuate this as they try to perpetuate the isolation of the Gaza Strip and the division of the Palestinians.
كل يوم
Every day there are things, new things, the atrocities and the annihilation committed by the Israeli occupation in the Gaza Strip is being revealed on a daily basis. Every day we are gathering the pieces of the martyrs in many places all across the Gaza Strip that we are able to arrive at after 37 days of the ceasefire. The Israeli occupation is still continues to fire. Yesterday, 4 martyrs, dozens of injuries, including a group of children who were at one of the shelters close to the so-called yellow line. Up to this moment, whatever aid, humanitarian aid does not really represent only third of the agreement in the humanitarian protocol. Talking about 200 to 220 trucks every day, including 100 of the private sector, and they're the same commodities that used to come before the ceasefire, which goes to the level of the Palestinian humanitarian catastrophe and its repercussions. Whatever gets into the Gaza Strip did not address the starvation and the famine. Every day we discover new cases of malnutrition among the children, women, especially pregnant women. 4 days ago, the 4 days ago, the weather changed, and we had the drop of temperature, and we have seen atrocities and the hardships that we have always warned against. The Gaza Strip currently 35%, 53% is under complete control of the occupation, is being subject to cleansing operation, destruction day and night. They use the robots in the eastern areas and in the northern areas, in the southern areas as well, and in Beit Lahia, Beit Hanun in the north. What the occupation controls are the eastern areas, the population and the displaced, who represent about 90% of the population. To this, 1.5 million have lost their homes completely. They are currently in shelters or in tents. These tents, these harmed and tents that are at the seaside or at areas that are lower or have slippery areas that were facing the flood, not just the rainwater, but the waste and the occupation has decimated and destructed many areas. Up to this moment, the occupation prevents the equipment and the necessary tools and to rehabilitate these networks, including the sewage network and thousands of bodies, corpses of the women and children and families. Entire families are under the ruins and under their homes and under the debris and under plants or buildings that were decimated by the Israeli robots, especially in the past 2 months. What the Israeli occupation has committed, the annihilation has left a great impact, a severe impact, and will continue to leave the Palestinian life, their health, their mental situation and psychological situation, especially the children. There are 18,000 patients who are in dire need for evacuation, medical evacuation. According to the World Health Organization, we have lost 900 souls who have not been able to leave Gaza for treatment, whereas the occupation has disrupted the medical system. About 90% of the hospitals and the clinics are out of the medical work now, and the occupation prevents the equipment and medical equipment and medicines, only 10% that to meet the needs. There are 300,000 chronic diseases, including children, the kidney, heart, and many more diseases, and also those who need to be diagnosed and they can't have the opportunity. They are deprived from this opportunity. I've seen severe malnutrition cases on the beds of some clinics, and it's very difficult. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to deal with them, and we expect that it would have a tremendous effect on their health situation. There are imputations. And so far, with no medical teams or equipment or tools for the prosthetics to help them have new limbs, or even the supporting equipment such as wheelchairs are not being able. Only a little number of these is allowed. What's worse is to consider the stationary and the educational materials or dual-use materials be prevented to combat education and learning. As you know, 2 years of depriving the Palestinians of receiving education, thereby decimating the schools, the infrastructures, or targeting the students themselves. There are 20,000 children who are school pupils or kids who were killed, in addition to teachers and others. We tried as much as we can to challenge this through 100 education points, despite the risks and dangers that we were facing and that the students are facing. We were trying to bring them all together in one place, despite the targeting of them, but there is a real will to receive education. What we have faced, even the white papers, the markers or the pens, the pencils that are also prevented, considering them inhuman materials. And this is only an attempt to deprive the Palestinians from access to education. In addition to the atrocities that we are discovering or facing, the rape cases committed or perpetrated by the Israeli occupation against the prisoners, both male and female. There was a case that was presented a couple of days ago. This woman who was subjected to this ugly crime, unfortunately, once again the international community is complicit and they don't make any effort to express their condemnation of this Israeli perpetrated actions. They don't even give, they can't even speak about or be fair to these victims, or to give a chance or an opportunity for the international conventions to play their role, or to we need to continue to work in every means possible to impose accountability and achieve justice at all levels. Our Palestinian people who have been steadfasting in the Gaza Strip, facing the displacement, facing the annihilation, is looking up to all the parties to work to achieve the international law principles and the humanitarian law principles. The international community has disappointed the Gaza Strip and the Palestinians over the tens of years. However, this disappointment, the disappointment of our people, was the worst in this war and this genocide. I would perhaps conclude with my visit to Jabalia refugee camp. The Jabalia refugee camp that is known to all the world. It's not merely for being the most densely populated area, nor that for the fact that the first Intifada was started at the Jabalia refugee camp, but it has been subjected to a complete decimation, destruction of the Al-Fakhura school that was 2014 faced a massacre, an ugly massacre. During this war as well, there have been, when I visited, there had been many families who came back from the southern areas towards the north. I met these families, including a girl. When I asked her about the basic needs of us, she asked to go back to school. School does not merely constitute a place for learning. It's also a place for protection. It's a place for mental support. Dear colleagues, to protect the civilians, protting the civilians is a priority, is a top priority that we have to work to perpetuate this or instill this reality, right, of the unprecedented crimes of the Israeli occupation. This stage could
سنشهده خلال الأيام
maybe
المقبلة
what we were going to
ستكون ظروف
witness or
جويا
face
ستكون
due
صعبة
to the bad weather
قاسيا
conditions in the coming
في ظل استمرار
days
الاحتلال
would be very
الإسرائيلي
harsh and
دخول
difficult as the
مستلزمات
Israeli
الإيواء
occupation continues to
واحتياجات
prevent
المواطنين
the equipment and
ولكن
the necessary
الجماعي
needs for the
ربما يكون
population.
صوتنا
But
أعلى
with the collective work, we
يمكن
could
أن
have
نصنع
a
تغييرا
better voice. We could make a
لصالح
change for the
ليس
best
فقط الشعب
interest,
الفلسطيني
not only
بل
of the
لكل الفئات
Palestinians, but
المضطهدة
all the
والتي يمكن أن تتعرض
repressed
لمثل
or
ما تعرض له
oppressed
الشعب
groups
الفلسطيني.
that
شكرا
our
جزيلا.
Palestinian people have been facing. Thank you so much.
شكرا جزيلا لك العزيز أمجد.
Thank you,
And you brought us
Amjad.
directly into the aftermath, into the ruins, and it's really heartbreaking just to realize this unparalleled levels of violence and atrocities committed against the Palestinian people. And not only you're cataloging based on your firsthand experience these unparalleled levels of destruction, but also you're showing firsthand the limits of protection and the political failures shaping Gaza today. With this account, I'd like us to move to our next speaker, Dr. Munir, to understand how we arrived at this moment. What now moved to this? What moves us in from one direction, what is happening into Gaza, into the slow death, fragmentation, and annexation of the Palestinian people? It would be crucial for us to understand what brought us to Gaza today through what is really happening slowly but creepingly into the Palestinian West Bank and Jerusalem reality. The floor is yours. Please share with us your experience.
شكرا جزيلا دكتورة
Thank you
زينة.
very much, Dr. Zena. I'm always honored to be with you in these meetings. Thank you for moderating this session. I'm also honored to be with my other colleagues in the panel. I wish to thank the organizers, Birzeit University, Work for Palestine, and the Independent Commission for Human Rights for organizing this symposium. I'm always happy to be at Birzeit University, which I like very much. And I feel that this very room is a room of ideas. The conferences you organize here usually produce great ideas that establish for more action in the future. I love it with the exception of one thing, it's very cold and you keep having an AC for cold all the time. I don't know why is it in winter and summer with an AC that is cold. So it's probably keeping the room cold so that the warmth comes from inside. My intervention today will cover 3 paradigms, and I decided to speak in Arabic. I didn't decide at first, but I looked at our participants here. Most of us are Palestinians, so it is better to present in Arabic. I will cover 3 points. First, our rights on the paper, and our situation on the ground, and what we are doing. I know that our situation on the ground is known to us in different forms. I will mention part of it. But probably what matters more is to discuss what we are doing. Our rights on paper are excellent. They are reassuring. There is a broad international recognition of the right to self-determination of the Palestinian people. There is a broad international recognition of the right to return. It is well established in the law. It is also established in the international recognitions. It is not even brought to doubt about the right to return, legally speaking, or legitimacy issues. There is a broad international recognition of the Palestinian state, which was pronounced at the UN General Assembly. It came through the ICC because it had to make a decision in 2021 about its jurisdiction. And from its point of view, the state of Palestine is West Bank, including Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. So the existence of the Palestinian question is no longer a matter of question. I'm shocked when a Palestinian politician speaks of this establishment of the Palestinian state. You have to speak of its independence, its liberation, end of occupation and colonization, and so on. It is established. During the recent genocidal war on the Gaza Strip, we've seen a lot of legal developments. First, memorandum of arrest or warrants of arrest against Israeli politicians for the first time in history, including against the Prime Minister Netanyahu and Gallant. They have not committed the crimes with their own hands, but they've done it through the institutions of the state. So it gives us an indication that all the state is implicated in perpetrating these crimes. We have an advisory opinion from the ICJ, which was brought up about a year ago, which says that the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territory, including the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, the question was about this particular boundary and this particular borders. It said that this is illegitimate occupation and it must end as soon as possible. The same opinion also said that the system created by the Israeli occupation in these areas is an apartheid system or racial segregation. I don't know how we differentiate this translation in Arabic, says the speaker, between apartheid and racial segregation, but in the end result, it is an apartheid regime. So they just found the Arabic term. We have another recent advisory opinion about UNRWA, which says that the measures taken by the Israeli occupation against UNRWA and its attempt to prevent it from performing its mandate is also illegal, because UNRWA must be given the freedom to operate and provide its humanitarian services together with other international organizations that are operating in the occupied Palestinian territory. We also have another question about the case of South Africa against Israel, when there is accusation of genocide. And I hope that it will end if South Africa remains determined to follow up in the case, and if it does not succumb to the international pressure against it, which have been increasing since the beginning of the case to now. The war ended now, and everybody's saying, what do you want to do? Who are you going to save? We don't need this case, they're saying, and pressure is increasing against South Africa. But in the end result, ICJ will find that Israel has actually committed a genocide, and it will rule for compensation and to stop the action if it continues, and to provide guarantees that it will not be repeated. And this is very important to me. The assurance that it will not be repeated is very important. There is another important issue where ICC about the case of Nicaragua against Germany. And this case considers not only the responsibility of Israel, but the responsibility of the third state, which is Germany in this case, as an example. But this is what is being presented to the court today. What is the responsibility or liability of Germany for its complicity with Israel, not only in a time when it is committing genocide in Gaza, but it is also committing other crimes of war and crimes against humanity, considering the expansion of settlements and the operations in the West Bank. All of these, and there are other decisions in regional forums in the African Union and different fora that are writing on paper things that consolidate our rights and call for measures. And I am always surprised, why do we call for measures rather than actually applying these measures? And this is the question that we want to ask now. What can we do? The situation on the ground, now this is the situation on paper. In theory, we're fine. It's comfortable. But the problem is on the ground. In addition to the genocide, which is taking place in the Gaza Strip, the fragmentation of the Palestinian people continues at a broader scale. We know the older fragmentation. First, there's the people of the area occupied in 1948. They have Israeli citizenship, and within this community, they are partitioned into different communities, not having an Israeli citizenship doesn't apply them. So there is the nationality law. So for the nationality, the Jewish people, wherever they come from, they have one nationality in their ID. That's according to the legal regime. But the Arabs, you could be a Druze, so you're not Arab, or you could be an Arab, you can be Muslim or Christian, so it's Arab, or you could also be Armenian, and therefore your nationality is Armenian, and you could be Cherkess, and your nationality will be Cherkess. So the Palestinian people in the area occupied in 1948 and Jerusalem is divided into several ethnicities. So it's not that I have this Israeli citizenship, it means that I'm recognized as a Palestinian. There is non-recognition of Palestinian, and this is increasing. They're trying even to avoid the term Palestinian. They started to use the term Arab again. The remaining Palestinian territory is also fragmented. The West Bank, we always say West Bank, Gaza, and Jerusalem, these three parts, major parts. But in the West Bank, there are subdivisions, A, B, and C. And these are zones, the same zone behind the wall, and they have special permits and things like that. So Gaza, which is clear, that the UN Security Council resolution increases the distance that we have with Gaza now, and it isolates Gaza further from the Palestinian people. It is with Gaza as an entity that the international community will apply a special regime on. I will not be speaking of the resolution itself now because other colleagues will be addressing the resolution itself. But we're noticing an increase in the annexation activity, annexation of land. All the time we say Israel will annex, will not annex. There is diplomatic mobilization. They will not allow Israel to annex the land, but what is happening on the ground? Roads are being built and you all drive your cars on these new roads. Part of these roads that are built will be only for the Palestinians, so that the Israeli traffic will be separated from the Palestinian traffic. There are gates at the entrance of every town, city, and village to make sure that the Palestinian people are separated from each other and that they can control its movement on the streets in the same West Bank. In addition to the wall and other restrictions like the fixed checkpoints, the ad hoc checkpoints, which control every detail of our life. Accelerating colonization with expansion of colonies and settlements at an unprecedented pace, thanks to Smotrich's efforts and others. So he's the one in the front, but behind him there is a whole thing. There is unprecedented suppression of freedoms in all areas. Even if you have a Facebook post or a word that you say that is recorded, it will be taken against you and you can be imprisoned and sentenced and convicted. There is a famous charge which is incitement to terrorism, but there is a new charge which is to go or to align with terrorism. If you see something talking about resistance and I do like to this post about resistance, it will be like aligning with terrorism. And this is a new charge in their laws. And some people were actually convicted and imprisoned and tortured for having pressed like on a post that supports resistance. In addition to the suppression of all human rights organizations, not only by Israel, but also by the USA, which is now sanctioning organizations like Al-Haq and the Palestinian Center for Human Rights and Al-Mizan Center. There are sanctions and accounts are being frozen in the banks. And many other things. I don't feel that I have to explain my situation further now. We all know this and we all come and study one aspect of the situation. But what I want to speak more of in the time that remains to me, I will cheat and take 2 more minutes. I am pretending to be okay, but I will take 2 extra minutes, says the speaker. What I'm going to say was what we are doing. There's the legal effort. We, the Palestinians, are contributing to this effort, whether it be as civil society or as non-governmental organizations. Several parties are making these legal efforts, and they contributed to the legal victory we made. And this is something that we have to place here. But especially after the last resolution of ICJ, which announced that the occupation is illegal and must be brought to an end, and then the UN General Assembly made a resolution to give Israel 12 months to put an end to its occupation. We are expecting, this was in September 2024. We would have expected that in September 2025, something big will happen, because during this year, since 2024 to 2025, we were supposed to be preparing at the diplomatic level for a big event at the UN General Assembly, which asked for this resolution, asked the question and received the answer. But what happened in September 2025? There was a peace conference which speaks of a two-state solution, and there were recognitions, new recognitions. France, the UK, and others, Canada. We were happy. Yes, they recognized us. But we did not speak of the occupation. We were happy with the recognition. Are we on the right diplomatic track? This is the question. Are we actually endeavoring to put an end to the occupation? When France recognized Palestine, did it say that the occupation must end tomorrow morning and Israel must withdraw from the West Bank and Gaza and Jerusalem at least? No, this did not happen. Neither France, Canada, or UK did that. And in the end result, after all what we said, we came to a resolution of the Security Council, which is a binding resolution, where the Arab states, including Palestine, approved this resolution, although it is far from anything we have accomplished before regarding our rights on paper in international fora. I know we are weak. I'm not saying that we have these muscles that can change the world, but my question is, what is our plan to reach these rights? Do we have a plan to end this pathway that started toward additional fragmentation, which was going on paper in the Israeli side, but now it's coming from the UN Security Council, or because Trump is actually scaring the whole of the world and nobody says no to him and nobody is voting against anything he proposes, and he can gather people in a conference and make everybody say yes or no to whatever he's convinced of. Does it mean that our previous accomplishments will be revoked now? To me, this is a major question, and I believe we know what we have to do. We know that we cannot liberate Palestine through international law, but we can create mechanisms that help us liberate Palestine. They are still speaking of fact-finding committees. We have fact-finding committees. We have a committee that specialized in this in Palestine. They report to the rest of the world. We have special rapporteurs that are also doing their work. We don't need additional fact-finding commissions. We need sanction mechanisms against the Israeli occupation, where there will be a conviction of the Israeli occupation until it starts to respect international law. This is the diplomatic track we need to follow. We have accomplishments, but then there are solutions that are imposed on us, and we are compelled to say that we accept them, and this is strange. I will stop speaking here. Thank you.
I really appreciate your note, how you moved from laying out the structural and legal architecture into the fragmentation by design, and what kind of strategy are we faced with, and where is our sensibility in the work that we are trying to do? Like, are we towards a strategy that rationalize and legalize more these illegitimate fragmentary acts, or we're more in a moment where we are just succumbing into kind of pressures? And with this, I'd like us to move to Dr. Ralph and our transition from the legal architecture to the legal weaponization and the work that you're doing on the Trump so-called peace plan. Please, the floor is yours. بس عن جد 10 دقايق. ماشي.
Thank you very much. It is such a great privilege and honor to be at this great university, Birzeit, here in Palestine, a place where I have learned so much of great value over the years, and also to be with dear friends and colleagues, both on the panel and in this room, and you, the wonderful students and faculty of this university. I am truly humbled. Yesterday, on the 17th of November 2025, the United Nations Security Council passed Security Council Resolution 2803, purporting to authorize a 2-year trusteeship over Gaza. Today, I will explain how this shameful act follows a long tradition in international diplomacy. The concept of trusteeship over people was adopted by Europeans for colonial rule over Africa at the Berlin Conference in the late 19th century, by the League of Nations after the First World War for the Mandate territories, including the Mandate here in Palestine, and by the United Nations after the Second World War for the Trust territories and all other non-settler colonies. Trusteeship assumes a world divided between supposedly childlike people incapable of looking after themselves, a characterization now shamefully applied to the Palestinian people of Gaza, and the supposed adults. Yes, Donald Trump, Tony Blair, and others, who are deemed able to rule not only over their own people, but also others. Falling into the supposed child category is the rationale for requiring trusteeship. In the League of Nations Covenant, the people of the mandates were, and I quote, not yet able to stand by themselves under the strenuous conditions of the modern world, end of quote. The child-adult relationship is the rationale for the duty of care. The adult is in charge, but must act in the interest of the ward. The adult's responsibility is to bring up the child so it will eventually attain maturity, to carry out tutelage, enabling development. The Gaza trusteeship will thus be temporary because it is transitional. The adults will build up local capacities for self-administration. The children will consequently mature and attain adulthood, and the need for trusteeship will then end. At the heart of this model is racism. In the colonial era, a racist global standard of civilization, adopted within a system dominated by Europeans, determined who the adults and the children were. No prizes for guessing who conceived themselves as the adults. Trusteeship was a self-serving sham, invoked in bad faith, serving as an alibi to rationalize colonial rule, which could now be justified as a civilizing mission. But the consequence of colonial liberation struggles after the Second World War, the end of formal colonization for non-settler colonies, was the adoption in international law of the right of self-determination. This was a repudiation of trusteeship. There were to be no more childlike and adult-like people in the world. The racist child-adult distinction between peoples was supposedly abolished. All peoples were equal and deserved freedom as adults. As the United Nations General Assembly stated 65 years ago next month on the 14th of December 1960, and I quote again, inadequacy of political, economic, social, or educational preparedness should never serve as a pretext for delaying independence, end of quote. Despite this, trusteeships continued, mostly conducted by international organizations, as in Bosnia and East Timor. Global human rights rules were invoked as seemingly non-racist standard of civilization that could determine, supposedly legitimately, where trusteeship was needed. International organizations were seen as capable of acting selflessly and thus performing the duty of trustee in good faith, in contrast to states. And temporary arrangements, when actually followed, were seen as supposedly genuine trusteeships, in that they didn't endlessly defer independence as the sham colonial versions had. I wrote a book on these arrangements and their antecedents in the colonial era. I am told that this is being used as the manual for the Gaza trusteeship. This horrifies me. At the ICJ advisory opinion case last year, I had the great privilege to represent the League of Arab States, and I argued, based on my academic research, that the Palestinian people had a legal entitlement to be free of the Israeli occupation without preconditions, simply because of their right, of your right to self-rule, not simply because you were being treated abusively. In its landmark ruling, the court agreed. This was a conclusion about the right to self-determination, pure and simple in and of itself. It would, therefore, apply equally to any form of foreign administration, however ostensibly humanitarian and time-limited. Replacing an abusive trustee with another form of trusteeship is not self-determination and would be illegal. We might be told that somehow this arrangement has been rendered lawful because the representatives of the Palestinian people, at least some of them, have somehow agreed to it. Just as supposedly Oslo legitimated the continuation of certain elements of the occupation, at least of parts of here in the West Bank. But agreements brought about through an unlawful use of force, as this one has been, and also contrary to peremptory or Jos Kogan's rules of international law, these are rules that cover fundamental subject matter, which for this reason cannot be limited by any other rules of international law, as this agreement, supposed agreement, has been, and the right of self-determination is a peremptory norm, such agreements are void. Again, as I had the privilege to argue for the League of Arab States before the ICJ and also the ICC last year, the best approach in situations like this is to say that such agreements may be in force insofar as they're compatible with the peremptory legal rights of the Palestinian people. For example, if they provided for the resumption of urgently needed humanitarian aid in Gaza, but those provisions which are not, such as permitting the trusteeship, are void. We might also be told that these illegalities have been cured by the UN Security Council resolution that was passed yesterday, Resolution 2803. Indeed, the common description of that resolution is that it has legalized the trusteeship. The Council did, in the past, purport to provide legal authority for those other trusteeships in Bosnia and East Timor. The Security Council has the power in the UN Charter to provide legal authority for something that would otherwise be illegal, and for this to be binding on all member states of the UN who've accepted this by being part of the UN Charter. Palestine is not, of course, a UN member state, because indeed the Council itself cannot agree, because of the threat of the veto from the US, to admit it. Moreover, in any case, the Council's power is limited. It can only act in a way that's compatible with the purposes and principles of the UN Charter. Those purposes and principles stipulate that the adjustment or settlement of disputes must take place, and I quote, in conformity with the principles of justice and international law. As the trusteeship is not in conformity with the norm of self-determination, and this has peremptory status, purporting to authorize the trusteeship in doing that, the Council is acting beyond its lawful powers, ultra vires. As such, the authorization is void. This is the same problem the Palestinian people faced over a century ago, when the Council of the League of Nations, very roughly speaking the equivalent to the UN Security Council, purported to vary the provisions of Article 22 of the League Covenant, which stipulated that Palestine should be provisionally recognized as an independent state, to instead permit, supposedly, the UK to retain control as a trustee in order to implement the Balfour Declaration commitment to establishing a Jewish state here in Palestine. As I argued in my academic publications and before the ICJ last year for the Arab League, the Council acted ultra vires, and the authority it therefore attempted to give to the UK was void. Just as then, trusteeship is back here in Palestine, and again, with a British character to it in the form of Tony Blair, so too again, the executive organ of the global organization is attempting to legalize this by acting beyond the limits of its constituent instrument. Truly, there is nothing new under the sun. I will end by quoting from the statement issued by the representatives of Hamas today in response to Security Council Resolution 2803, and I quote, "We call on the international community and the Security Council to uphold the international law and humanitarian values, and to adopt resolutions that achieve justice for Gaza and the Palestinian cause through the actual cessation of the brutal genocidal war on Gaza, reconstruction, ending the occupation, and enabling our people to self-determination and establish their independent state with Jerusalem as its capital." End of quote. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph. Thanks a lot, Ralph, for giving us your generous analysis on how political projects are being used as a legal weaponization and how they are being used as tools to legitimize and normalize illegal and illegitimate acts. With that, I'd like to go to Melissa and the idea that we started our session with, the idea of Duncan Kennedy's flipping and the freedom of choice when reclaiming the interpretive powers of the law. And building on Amjad, Munir, and Ralph, I'd like to go back to move to you with your take based on your first-hand experience engaging with mechanisms. Munir concluded with a question: how can we reclaim the power of the law, and what kind of interpretive powers are there for the law, and how can we use certain available mechanisms to put the question of accountability and ending impunity on the table? What is left for us? What kind of choices do we have? ICC, ICJ, corporations, in 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Birzeit, shukran kathir, for this opportunity to speak. to my colleagues at Law for Palestine and to the Independent Commission for Human Rights for this opportunity. So indeed, over the last 2 years, we have seen unprecedented legal developments in the case of Palestine. And these have helped make important strides towards some process to end the impunity that has been so integral to Israel's dehumanization of the Palestinian people and the execution of its genocide. The job is on all of us to make these developments meaningful and material, both as lawyers and more broadly as advocates and allies in the Palestinian struggle. And this is where the observation that you make at the beginning is where I also wanted to start, Dr. Jalad, that the law isn't neutral. We need to understand what it is. It is both concrete agreements in the written text, it's in the form of treaties, conventions, resolutions, and judgments, and it is influenced and developed by the interpretation of these texts. And it is this function of interpretation where broader politics come into effect to create or to close down the space for progressive interpretation. In this sense, law is always evolving. And while the dominant powers are doing their utmost to shape it, as Dr. Ralph Wild has just laid out, we have work to do to make sure that the decisive developments of the last year or so, which have come at enormous cost, are made concrete through our advocacy, our interpretations, and our applications of these developments. So here I want to focus on two specific areas of law where there is an opportunity to take these generalized legal developments and begin to interpret them and imply them in advocacy and in litigation. The first being corporate complicity and the second being third state complicity. Before I do this, I need to speak a little bit more about those legal developments that Dr. Munir particularly laid out. The first of these concerns that matter of genocide, and you have the 3 provisional measures orders that were ordered in the case of South Africa versus Israel. In April 2024, you had the case of Nicaragua versus Germany. Although it did not issue provisional measure orders, the court did not dismiss the case, and it elected to make judicial comment not only on Germany's possible obligations, but on those of all states. Then in May 2024, the prosecutor of the ICC sought arrest warrants, which were issued in November 2024. Now, while these legal developments have had little meaningful impact for Palestinians on the ground, that requires political will. They do nonetheless have significant legal meaning that needs to be utilized outside of Palestine to put pressure on all states. Specifically, and as the Special Rapporteur, Ms. Albanese, signaled in her most recent report, they signaled the crossing of particular legal thresholds. While the situation in Palestine was already primed for genocide and perhaps even occurring prior to October 7, the issuance of the first provisional measures orders in January, based on a conservative interpretation, signaled the confirmation of a serious risk of genocide, triggering the duty to prevent. As the Special Rapporteur then goes on to authoritatively suggest in her report, the culmination of these orders and the actions by the prosecutor by May 2024 shifted the situation at a minimum from a legal threshold of serious risk into one of imminent risk or actual genocide occurring as a matter of law. In other words, states, corporations, other third parties were now on notice, and their actions thereafter were done in the context of having actual or constructive knowledge of a situation of genocide, and this means legal questions of complicity must be considered. Alongside this was the handing down of the ICJ's advisory opinion on the broader question of occupation, which has already been spoken about. But the illegality of the entire occupation and the principle on the basis of principal violations of jus cogens norms, being the right to self-determination and the prohibition on territorial annexation by force, confirm the seriousness and the structural nature of the violations that are at the heart of Israeli conduct. And here I am drawing very particularly on the work of Dr. Wild, that the Israeli presence at all is the problem, not the manner in which Israel is conducting itself. and that this has important implications that must change how we interpret and characterize the legal wrongdoings and the responsibilities at issue. Of course, there are limitations in how far the court was willing to go, which is typical of courts, in deciding only what's in front of them and what politics allows them to decide. But it is part of our role through our political and legal advocacy and strategy to interpret and press their particular application. So turning to what these developments mean for accountability, the first area is corporate responsibility. Now, this is an area significantly under-addressed by international law. Corporations have been able to wield much influence to shape the law, such that in many jurisdictions, corporations enjoy human rights, but do not possess particularly strong obligations. You see this particularly in Europe. This is very much a deliberate consequence of the process of colonization, one in which the state or European powers initially used corporations to lead the state project of colonization, before then using the legal system to outsource the worst excesses to corporations and shield their accountability through legal mechanisms like the corporate veil. Now, while I am generalizing about that process, this legacy remains and it needs to be understood in how we're looking at international law today. There have, however, been major developments in this space in the last 15 to 20 years, and Palestine provides us with an opportunity to push the law further on this. The UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, by which many international businesses, especially, and those involved in Palestine and the Israeli economy say they abide by, set out the primary framework for understanding corporate responsibilities. The supposedly non-binding nature of these obligations being relevant to the corporate sector's willingness to claim these rights. But the first thing to say is, are they so non-binding? International criminal law, which is binding on all, including corporate executives and corporations, is in practice no more binding if it almost exclusively requires the enforcement in national, not international courts. So what I suggest is that these principles are better understood as providing a framework that lawyers should be using to identify and shape legally relevant facts in their domestic cases. When companies have these responsibilities, especially when they say they abide by them, then we can now say that they know that they have X, Y, and Z responsibility that they should be taking. And when they do not, we have some evidence of their knowledge, their intent, or their actions that might be used in domestic cases. The second thing to say is what their specific meaning is in the context of Palestine. The UN Guiding Principles set up a three-tiered system of responsibility. Businesses are either directly linked to, contributing to, or causing human rights violations, and these trigger particular responsibilities. And depending on the actions they do or do not take, they may increase their liability along this spectrum. If we consider just the lowest level of link, the direct link, and this extends to any link that can be established throughout a business supply chain to its subsidiaries, its parent companies, its business partners, a business it invests in to profit. If that direct link to a human rights violation is established, it triggers a responsibility to exercise influence to bring an end to that violation. And if it cannot bring an end to that violation, it has a responsibility to terminate the relationship. In the Palestinian context, with all of these legal developments, if a business is in any way linked to the occupation, be it through home demolitions, energy supply, construction materials, tourism, then thanks to the advisory opinion, the violation we are first and foremost talking about is the violation of the right to self-determination. In other words, a business is required to exercise their influence to end the violation of the right to self-determination, not just the adequate standard of living or the right to education or the right to movement. Being a structural violation, this is objectively impossible. No business is going to stop Israel from violating the right to self-determination. What this creates is a prima facie obligation for all businesses to terminate their relations or not to engage at all. And if they persist, or if they do engage in the domain, they move into the domain of contributing to, and it raises questions as to complicity. As a consequence, every business that engages in Israel and its economy, and if you look at the Special Rapporteur's report on corporate complicity, she lays out the structure of the way in which businesses are connected to a whole Israeli economy, businesses are directly linked to the occupation, and they are contributing to human rights violations, which raises legal questions of complicity that can be litigated domestically and are being litigated domestically. I'm looking at the time, and I'm just very quickly going to try and run through the third state obligations because I think this is also important. Third states in this situation with all these legal developments have a whole range of obligations that are being triggered. They have direct obligations they owe to the Palestinian people irrespective of what Israel is doing. So states, when they're recognizing Palestinian statehood, are putting conditions on this and violating very directly their own obligations to the Palestinian people on the right to self-determination. There are also the obligations owed erga omnes because of the seriousness of the norms Israel is violating. There are due diligence obligations around human rights, international humanitarian law, and the duty to prevent apartheid and the duty to prevent genocide. And then there's the obligation not to be complicit or to directly participate in these wrongful acts. Now, a question often arises, is there a legal requirement to implement an arms embargo or a trade embargo on Israel? And it's not a straightforward answer, it's a matter of legal interpretation. But when we're assessing whether states are complying with all of these legal obligations, we need to consider two things. The holistic scenario, what does it mean when you have all of these obligations triggered and not just one obligation triggered? And also considering what mechanisms are available in special areas of law, the Arms Trade Treaty, the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, the General Agreement on Trade and Services, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, etc., that contain very specific obligations, but in most cases rights to act, where there is a violation of the jus cogens principles of international law. And what should be argued is that when assessing whether states have taken all measures available to them in order to fulfill their obligations, in all of these circumstances, with all of these mechanisms available to them, the only way that a state could possibly discharge their obligations vis-a-vis the state of Israel is to implement a full arms embargo, a full trade embargo, and all of these other things. And then it raises questions of, if states are not doing this, when are they stepping into the domain of complicity? And I'm going to leave it there.
That's a fantastic and robust way to leave it at the level of complicity and state responsibility, third-party state responsibility. With this, I think you've seen what we've done now, moving from the first-hand account and experience, voices from Gaza, and then the way documentation, narrative, and experiences, they shape the aspects of the legality and the illegality, and how narrative is used towards accountability is what we're looking into more today. And then the fragmentation by design, the different structural, architectural regimes that are being deployed by design in order to continue for the denial of the self-determination of the Palestinian people and the legalization of illegal acts. And then moving towards the international plane, and then what kind of political projects are being made in the name of the law in order to legalize also illegitimate acts, and then how law is becoming really weaponized in that terrain, ending with what choices are left and how can we flip the narrative, how can we reclaim the interpretive power of the law, and how can we think about whether we're talking about genocide, apartheid, annexation. These are binding categories in the law. What is your role as law students, as people who are engaged with the law, is also something that we need to think about. How do we move beyond the characterization of certain acts and looking at the intent, the culpability, the consequences, the wrongdoing, and how can we build our own project is the question that we leave for you here in the room. What is your role as students who are engaged with the law today? What is your role while engaging with the political projects? What choices do you have? What choices do you want to flip the law to reclaim its power? We all understand international law is under attack. Law is one of the tools, and it's not the only tool, and it has just so much that it can provide for, how we reclaim the power of the law, how we reclaim our agency in building our own strategy and engaging with the mechanisms that are available. With this, I think this paves the way for the second session on ending colonization. We'll take a 10-minute break and no discussion. Thank you for joining us for the first panel. Thank you so much. I thank Melissa, Amjad من غزة, شكرا كتير كتير. I thank Ralph for joining us from UCL, Munir من القدس University, and I came to you from AUB Beirut. Please enjoy the 10-minute break. كله 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes. عن جد 10 minutes break, and then we reconvene here. Enjoy the rest of the work of it today. And I thank the organizers, and I thank Birzeit and Law for Palestine, and the audience online. We have over 100 people joining us online. Thank you, guys.
يعطيك العافية.
يعطيكم العافية.
عندك إثارة. شغالين اليوم بطلع على البرنامج.
I'm still hesitant when I partial audience عرب. يا ريت. أنا حتى كنت صايلة كل العناوين بالإنجليزي. ناس بالإنجليزي صح؟ وفارتشا. فارتشا. كيف اسم فارتشا؟ لا قصدي الباقي. فارتشا بس الباقي. الرسم موفر.
يعني حتى بالعربي بيشرح
مساء الخير جميعا مرة ثانية في الجلسة الثانية.
Good afternoon, everyone. In the next second session, decolonization, the future of the Palestinians' right to self-determination. We have 4 speakers in this session. Dr. Dalal Ariqat, professor in the Arab American University in Palestine, Miss Inas Abdelrazak, the Executive Director of the Palestinian Institute for General Diplomacy, and we have the General Coordinator and in the Lahai group. Start the first intervention with Dr. about the genocide, of the genocide, the annexation, and Apartheid. Where do the Palestinians stand today? 10 minutes for every speaker so that we can have a Q&A session at the end, towards the end. Thank you, Dana. Thank you, everyone. Let me first thank Birzeit University, the Independent Commission of Human Rights, and to share with you a special feeling today. I'm really proud to be in Birzeit University. I was excluded to work on my PhD, to work on the Palestinian state and the institutions to build the Palestinian state, which all goes into our right to self-determination. I'm really pleased to be here with you today. The title of my intervention is about the systems of genocide, apartheid, and the annexation. I would start here. I don't know about legally speaking, being specialized in social sciences, if we can call them regimes or if they are actually crimes that they face the actual situation that we're experiencing as Palestinian people today after a big experience of readings and living under occupation. We need to realize that all these regimes or all these crimes or genocide, whether genocide or racial discrimination or apartheid or annexation, all comes under the umbrella of the Israeli military occupation. That's the basis of our suffering, and this is based on solving or addressing the struggles and the lack of stability in the entire region that starts with the Israeli military occupation. That should be ended. This is something that was enhanced by the advisory opinion back in July 24 by the ICHR. When we speak about decades of occupation, we are discussing military occupation. As Palestinians, we confront all forms of occupation on a daily basis. We can't, as academics, we can't deny that this is a hegemony and control system that we all live under. This morning, we woke up on the 28-0 resolution that was taken by the highest executive commission, that's UN Security Council, and this resolution should urge us to encourage us to think about our privacy in our national decision regarding our right to self-determination, and the Palestinian state as a whole. We the past year testimony of recognition of the state. These are achievements. I'm not underestimating that, but these are not the victories that we that can achieve in the Palestinian history according to political senses. The recognition is important, but sovereignty is more important. As Palestinian people, we can't achieve our right to self-determination without dealing directly with the military, with the Israeli military occupation. Regarding the temporary arrangements, the UN Security Council resolutions about the International Stabilization Force, lessons learned for us as Palestinians, the main lesson learned is that the temporary arrangements are measures that becomes a permanent status quo, unfortunately. Today, we see that there is an attempt with legal and diplomatic international tools to annul the Palestinian right to self-determination. I repeat that these international attempts are not new. We have been suffering from them in the past century, and we have documented them by many institutions, including Birzeit University. A couple of years ago, there was a conference about the British mandate and the work that Britain or the UK worked to perpetuate the rules to end or to the Palestinian right to self-determination. We see this today on the ground through the military forces on the ground, and also the legal manipulation of trying to impose certain facts on the Palestinian context. We see the demographic designs as we see the ongoing activity, demographically speaking and geopolitically speaking. Also, each and every one of us don't need to be a professor to realize that there is no room, no realistic room speaking politically to the Palestinian state or to our right to self-determination that we are dreaming of. We see an international system that helps Israel with its impunity, and on the contrary, it imposes a penalty on the weaker side. This includes the genocide, the annexation, and the apartheid, all three systems that I call genocide, annihilation, that all best serve the colonial occupation that comes under the Israeli military occupation umbrella. So my advice today is that academically and legally speaking, we need to continue to search and post or publish stuff about these, especially the legal right to self-determination, and not to drop the language of the UN Security Council or we don't see such terminology today, whether this is intentional or unintentional, but our role as academia and as we need to bring back this terminology to the international arena when we speak about the Israeli military occupation. I would not take much. My colleagues have mentioned genocide. Today we have the fact-finding missions. We have international reports. Our last one was September, who all emphasized that there is genocide, including the physical harm, mental harm, and the killing of human beings. All have opposing measures. All that you hear on the media and international reports. I'm talking to the students now. These are not a language, not political language or slogans or merely slogans or verbal statements. This is based on investigations that proved Israel as committing genocide. There are people who think that we are under the impression of the ceasefire. There is complicity, and there is also they have weakened or they have mitigated the ceasefire or but the ceasefire never took place completely or fully. Israel, alongside the genocide in the Gaza Strip, there is the secular activity in the West Bank, including Masafarietta and E1 and the Jordan Valley, and the plans that isolate Jerusalem completely from the West Bank and the northern West Bank from its southern areas. This is there's no continuity or any geographical continuity to take us to speak or to achieve the independence that we dream about. These geopolitically speaking, these aspects, we need a clear international recognition of all these facts that are imposed on us. There has to be a political pressure with the Palestine as its source, in addition to international means or instruments. Accountability is absent in the international diplomatic arena. Even Trump's peace plan, the UN Security Council, there's no talk about Israel's responsibility at all, whether applying the laws or the advisory opinion or the ICC rulings should all remind us that the crimes are still taking place, not only the genocide, but we're talking about apartheid, the annexation and racial discrimination, but also the prisoners file are trying to legalize the Israeli crime against the prisoners file. We need to continue to request and to demand and to revisit to bring back the Trump plan to its legal dimension. Our role as Palestinians, law persons or human rights persons, we need to bring that back to all these resolutions discussion. One last in the room point, as Palestinians, we are suffering from a very sensitive situation. We might call it a conflict, but I would be speaking from political terms, diplomatic terms. There are many players who are playing in our fate or destiny, because we're living in a pragmatic neoliberal world that's based on profit, on interests. It's neither the diplomatic or legal instruments or the international law or values. Everything today is based on profit. We can't deny that there is Western complicity. Also the military power that enabled Israel to commit these crimes, and without the Western support, it would have never been done. It has crisis nowadays. There are more than 70 conflicts across the world, where the world or the international law instruments have been enforced, we would have never reached this situation. Also, the Arab normalization and the increasing Arab Zionist ideological problem that is on the rise, that is going beyond or bypassing the Palestinian rights and deprives us from our right to self-determination. Without the recognition of all these facts, the right to self-determination remains a provision, a slogan, and a political reality. The Palestinian model that we expect to, based on my own experience as Palestinians, we need the young generation to be specialized in the diplomatic law. And the past 8 decades, there are no law or diplomatic instruments. My advice to you is to be specialized in these instruments, because Palestine is a just cause that necessitates specialized people who are able to work with these instruments or these tools, because diplomacy is the soft means. Today, Trump is trying to impose the new facts or reality to replace the Palestinian sovereignty and Palestinian right to self-determination. There is a trusteeship, an external trusteeship against under this certain terminology like peace, and the legal and legitimate dimension should be brought back. Bringing Tony Blair to all these scenarios takes me back to the British efforts he made in depriving the Palestinian and denying the Palestinian people its right to self-determination. Last but not least, we need always to remember accountability, representation. This is where the young generation's role comes in. You need to and also to build networks and relations. Today we are failing. We are facing a failure of the international community and the international law, which encourage us to join forces together and to work together. And thank you for this symposium that encourages us to think about a movement that comes from within. We should not expect solutions from the outside. We need to find or to establish solutions that we can deal with in order to deal with the outside world. Thank you, Dr. Dalal. Because hope cannot be separated from diplomatics and politics. It is a logic of power. Now we give the floor to Dr. Bassem Zubeidi about the hegemony policy and how it affects the Palestinian question. Thank you.
يعني بداية بحب أشكر القائمين على هذا النشاط المهم.
First, I wish to thank the organizers for this important symposium. I have chosen to speak about kind of intensive ideas for my intervention. Therefore, I thought of reading it slowly so that you can hear it correctly. It is about the diplomacy of hegemony and reshaping the Palestinian future. I endeavor in this short intervention to clarify how the diplomacy of hegemony is being exploited, or the so-called peace initiatives, to transform these initiatives into tools to redraft the very narrative of the Palestinian question and to control its future directions. My intervention first places the economic plan for Gaza, which has been ratified by the UN Security Council yesterday, within its historic context since the Oslo Accords, as part of a series of external interventions that reproduce control rather than dismantling it. Then the intervention will provide a quick analysis of the impact of this plan on the concept of sovereignty and the possibility of the establishment of a state and the limits of reconstruction under a functional governance which is not sovereign. My intervention the probability of exercise of the international law. Finally, the intervention proposes a number of political and social action to transform the Trump plan from a tool to prolongate control to a real solution. First, the Gaza plan of Trump is what brings up the worst initiatives after Oslo. It is a plan that was drafted with the terminology that has produced the ongoing Jewish genocide. And it is wanted to start in Gaza as a first step before it is generalized and disseminated to re-engineer the geography and Palestinian rights in total. To deprive the Palestinians of the least components of justice and humanity. To make this plan succeed, the Americans and their partners aim to consolidate this concept through a mix of soft and tough suppression. On the one hand, the Palestinians are forced into imposed tracks, and on the other hand, they are being tempted by some life-saving issues like reconstruction, which makes the conditions of control advance under basic living needs. In parallel, there is an internal fragmentation which is deepened to ensure ongoing division and to create the conditions for its periodic reproduction as a precondition for the success of this vision and to sustain the fragile Palestinian national structure. The anecdote here is that this track, although it is clear, is usually ignored by the current Palestinian leadership under several pretexts, in which there is a mix of fear of loss of the privilege of the Palestinian Authority with some gambling over some economic gains, which will not change anything in the essence of this project, which is based on exclusion and control. In this sense, the plan is part of a comprehensive political engineering that does not target the geography alone, but extends to the social and political structure of the Palestinian people with the participation or the calling on some weakened Palestinian powers to be part of this track. Second, the repercussions. The Palestinian sovereignty, which is an inherent national right and the essence of the presence of people on their land. The Trump plan comes to dismantle it by turning it into a negotiable item after it was an inalienable position. The right to independence is a functional model which is fragile, which is managed from abroad, and which exclude the Palestinians from making their own decisions and prevents them from real participation in drawing their future. Reconstruction, which is supposed to be a space for exercising national sovereignty and the people's right to redeem itself under the genocide, is also transformed into a control of conditioned subordination, which subjects the will of the Palestinians to the orders of those who have been flagrantly, explicitly, or implicitly complicit with the genocide. The same standards of the occupation power is imposed for demolition under genocide. The two processes, that is demolition and reconstruction for the colonizer, are two complementary tracks. By demolition, tens of thousands are killed, and by reconstruction, the very national belonging is meant to be killed, and the ability to build an independent future is also killed. This system does not stop at reconstruction alone, but extends to daily living issues like water, energy, and transport. These items are subject to external controls that go beyond the Palestinians. External funding, rather than being a tool of empowerment to redeem the right and rebuild the state, it becomes a political and security tool that is conditioned to reorganize the priorities of development to serve external agendas rather than responding to the real needs of the people. In this case, reconstruction becomes a track that is devoid of sovereignty and of the conditions of national dignity. In brief, Gaza plan of Trump, it is not a plan for peace. It is not a project for development. It is rather an extension of the policies of fragmentation and annexation. It aims to amputate 14% of the Palestinian people, which is the percentage of the population of the Gaza Strip from the Palestinian population. It was preceded by Trump's deal of the century, which created the locally appropriate conditions for the occupation to control Jerusalem, the West Bank, and the Golan Heights. Therefore, those who what is being presented as reconstruction and development is only a redrafting of the very concept of sovereignty over the place by deepening the pillars of subordination and annexation. Second, the limits of the possibility of exercising the right to self-determination, facing what is being imposed by Trump land and the direct and brutal intervention of the US. The following question is risen. Is there still room to speak of the right to self-determination in a time when there is the strong fascism of colonization and there is complicity of the international system that is explicitly extortion with all the structures of genocide? This very system becomes an environment that produces violence and is adapted to its logic. How can this statement be appropriate under the internal fragmentation, which is killing the internal Palestinian structure? The quick answer to this question is yes. But It will not be without having sufficient courage among the Palestinian leadership to give up its classical discourse, which is no longer for this time, or the conditions of the battle that is being imposed. The current context imposes a compound claim in which there are the tools of international criminal law and the guarantees of protection of the populations and the available tools of deterrence in the international system by reviving the founding principles that were made to erase the very identity. Those who take the easy road and are subjected to what can be harmful could bring benefits, and see in the international recognitions of the Palestinian state recently an indication of light by the end of that tunnel. They should be reminded that the state without sovereignty is not a state. It is a body without soul. It is an entity that is up in the air, that has no foundations in the power of legitimacy or legitimacy of power. Fourth, how should be the response? Practically speaking, it is necessary to rebuild a unified national project that is based on the unity of people, land, and right, and to conceptualize a strategy that associates resistance to rebuilding institutions to represent the people. Legally speaking, it is necessary to expand the accountability front by documenting the genocide, annexation, and discrimination crimes, and to put into force international mechanisms to prosecute the perpetrators from the colonial powers and the complicits. Legally, it is necessary to organize the society and promote steadfastness to provide all necessary support and revive hope of a better future. Considering international coalitions, it is necessary to shift international solidarity from a moral action into a political influential action through parliaments, unions, and corporates and academic partnerships by accountability and imposing restrictions on all entities that support the annexation and genocide plans. In conclusion, the essence of the battle is not a single plan or an interim plan. It is about the very form of Palestinian existence. Reconstruction is being redrafted as a tool for subordination, and sovereignty is devoid of its meaning, and rights are treated as privileges that can be given or taken away. Even the institutions and programs are adapted and tailored to keep the Palestinian as a recipient, not a proactive. Therefore, we need a Palestinian leadership that is capable of confronting these challenges and that has the necessary sight to build a coherent national project that protects the unity of 15 million Palestinians and reprioritize items to transform this national power into organized power. It is also necessary to have a comprehensive legal accountability and effective international coalitions and institutional framework that can defend the Palestinians. Only then, and only then, the Palestinians will become free and have their rights. They will not be pushed to take options that are not made for them, and they will not be driven to a future that is shaped by others. They will go to a future that is made by them, so that the Palestinian leaderships should avoid the curses of next generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bassem. Thank you for clarifying how the international complicity contributed to embodying the sovereignty, the meaning of sovereignty and the meaning of the right of the Palestinians to self-determination. In the same context, we go with Professor Nas about the reconstruction described as leading occupation towards a sovereignty future based on the rights of Gaza. Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. I will be speaking in English. This is also the influence of the Palestinian displacement, and so people like me have weak Arabic.
The organizers. So I'm not an academic, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm very happy to be here alongside this assembly because I think I will complement with what was said, and I think that is really a good basis because our base is, I think, the law and institutions and our values, but I think right now, I think we understand the problem. So We're very good Palestinians at analyzing the problems, analyzing our plight, but I think often we get paralyzed when it comes to thinking about the solutions. I know Varsha will talk about the international aspect and what the international actors can do. So I will focus on us, on the Palestinian people. We, as Palestinians, what can we do today? I'm also not an expert on reconstruction, so I'm conscious that I was asked to discuss this topic because we are doing a lot of work around building consensus. And this is the point I think I want to start with, which is, first of all, everything is political. So today is a very dark day, I think, for Palestine. The plan that has been green-lighted by not only the US and Israel, but its allies, Arab countries, is effectively being implemented already, in a way. It's not just on paper. There is structures that are being put in place to discuss how Gaza will be managed, how humanitarian aid will be managed, who will let things enter and not. And so when we're talking today about entering milk into Gaza, this is political. When we're talking about, who will be, what will be the company that will be able to sell its products in Gaza, that's political. Who will decide on where the buildings are going to be built or where the rubbles are going to be evacuated? This is political. And so I think this is very important because we as Palestinians often, we are shying away from politics, especially when we say siyasa. A lot of people are afraid. The context and the environment is difficult, but everything is political. And what that means is that we can have the best plans to rebuild and recover Gaza. It depends who are the people who will decide and discuss these plans, who are the people who will be implementing these plans. And I think it's today upon us to rebuild, I think, a national project and political representation and political institutions that represent us. And I think this is the core of everything. Because we can have as much international solidarity as we want. We can do as much diplomacy as we want. This is my job. This is our everyday struggle and resistance to try and get the international community to side with us. But at the end of the day, we have a PLO leadership that has green-lighted the decision of yesterday. They have agreed for the US to colonize Gaza. They have said yes, because they're accountable to their donors, because they're accountable to their interests, and because they don't represent the interests of the Palestinian people. So I think the question becomes, how do we do that? And I think there, the concept of organizing in English kind of has the same meaning as tanzim, but with not the same implications. We need to organize. That means a lot of you, a lot of us are always, doing many activities, doing many projects, doing many things, many campaigns, many things you are, you all, feel it's important. Is that contributing to you building a group, you building a collective, you building bridges between the Palestinians here and the Palestinians in diaspora who have more space to organize as well and to speak up and to raise money and to raise funds? That organizing, us being millions of birds and having to come together as one and flying in the same direction is what we all have in our hands. And it can start with a small group, with a small collective. It can start with a student group to the initiatives that we have been seeing on the ground. And so this is where I go back to Gaza. It's over the past 2 years, we've been working with a lot of mutual aid initiatives. That is people in Gaza who have come to support each other for food, for shelter, for ta'ziz al-sumud in general. And they have built this infrastructure for support by the Palestinian diaspora. The Palestinian diaspora has mobilized resources, but the Palestinian diaspora also, and the Palestinians living in exile, are also being, further organizing. The idea is how can we also build that power together in different places so that it builds the infrastructure that the current plan and the current Palestinian leadership will not offer. So what's in front of us is we have basically US authorities, the army, US contractors that will come and implement certain projects that are discussing with different sets of Palestinian actors. But again, these Palestinian actors are not the representative of the Palestinian people. So this creates a big danger ahead because you have so many groups that are involved in what's happening in Gaza now, from armed groups to businesses to existing authorities in the West Bank, existing authorities in Gaza. And this can create chaos because I think, as Dr. Dalal said, there is external forces that are choosing who to sponsor, choosing who is a good Palestinian to support and who is not a good Palestinian to support. And I think this is at the core of building a path forward for Gaza, is that at this moment, we need to have a dialogue with each other between the NGOs on the ground. I think Ustaz Amjad Shawwa was here before. He's in Gaza. He's from the Palestinian NGOs. There is the chambers of commerce. There is the businesses. There is the municipalities. There is the people in the West Bank. There is students. There is experts. We have, as Palestinians, we have brilliant architects and so on. And so I think the question becomes how these forces can be organized together. And some of it has been built. And so if we take two different plans that have thought about the reconstruction of Gaza, the first one is the Phoenix Plan. I don't know if you've heard about it, but it's basically Gaza municipalities alongside many different actors, again, like experts, muhandisin, engineers, syndicates, businesses that have put this technical plan together that said this would be a nice plan of how Gaza could be rebuilt from a Palestinian vision and from a Palestinian perspective. Next to that is the Egyptian plan, right, that has been approved by the Arab League. That plan is, if you see it, and I encourage you to go and see it, it's basically not taking into account Gaza, Gaza's culture, Gaza's social fabric, Gaza's existing urban areas and agriculture areas. And what happens is these are technical plans. Again, which one will be chosen is a political matter. It is political, and at this stage, the Egyptian plan is the one that has the backing of the powerful states that are trying to impose a vision on us, not the Palestinian plan. And I think we go back to the principle of the political centrality of this, and of the need for us at this stage of our cause, of our struggle, to organize. And so I think the fundamental here is we as outside of the current political structures, how do we reinvent a political structure? The political structure today, it's clear that, it's clear that in international law has a basis that clearly sets the parameters that Palestinians have a right to self-determination. But I think right now we need to act and transform and experiment what that self-determination is. How is it to take decisions in our own hands? And this starts again with organizing at a small scale to the larger scale so that we can rebuild basically what the PLO was in the 1960s, but in a different way. We're in 2025 today, and the way that we have been looking at Ta'ziz al-Sumud in Gaza is different from the way we were doing things in the 1960s and 1970s. And because of such danger right now on us, I think there is very concrete ways where we have to, we have to really take advantage of our people. Inside Palestine, outside Palestine, the resources that we can mobilize, whether it's financial resources or non-financial resources, the energy, to be coming together as collective. So my final recommendation is every decision that is taken by every actor that is Palestinian, whether it's a business, whether it's a chamber of commerce, whether it's a student, whether it's an organization that does diplomacy, think about, is this project that I'm doing, is this decision that I'm taking, is it contributing to building the political infrastructure for a national project? البنية التحتية. This is what we need. We need an infrastructure that will eventually build a broader national umbrella. But it starts at a very small scale, and I think this is what Gaza needs right now, because people are still under threat of being displaced. People are still under threat and still starved. So the very urgency is, how can we get our people to remain on their land and resist? And that resistance starts with us, from the small scale to the national scale. And think about if you can build consensus within a group of students, or between a group in Palestine and a group outside Palestine, to just bring some form of shelter to 10 or 15 families in Gaza. That's organizing, and that's an achievement, because that infrastructure can grow, and you can then build other initiatives and political decisions among other groups. And so, yeah, I'll stop there. Thank you.
شكرا أستاذة إيناس. من أهمية عدم الانصياع لما يتم استخدامه من مصطلحات في القرارات الدولية، وعدم الانصياع لسياسة الأمر الواقع التي تفرضها علينا الدول الاستعمارية.
المساءلة والمحاسبة كما استعرض الدكتورة دلال، وحتى أن يكون إعادة تعريف السيادة، أن تكون إعادة تعريف السيادة من منظور فلسطيني، والانتباه إلى الدبلوماسية المتواطئة في تعريف وتنفيذ خطط إعادة الإعمار، وحتى يصبح تقرير المصير ممكنا، وضرورة بناء الإجماع الفلسطيني والمشروع الوطني، وتنظيم المبادرات والحوار الفلسطيني بين جميع أطياف الفلسطينيين أينما وجدوا كما ذكرت الأستاذة إيناس. ننتقل الآن إلى التضامن الدولي مع فارتشا، حول مداخلتها حول التضامن الدولي العالمي كقوة قانونية وسياسية، استعادة القانون الدولي لخدمة إنهاء الاستعمار والعدالة. فارتشا, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me.
شكرا جزيلا على استضافتي، وشكرا للمتحدثين الرائعين، وأنا أتشرف بأن أتحدث معهم في ذات الجلسة. أعتذر عن عدم وجودي معكم، أنا أتحدث معكم من الهند، وهذا مؤشر آخر إلى تراجع التضامن بين الجنوب العالمي، لأن
be there in Palestine with all of you, but I'm honored to be able to speak to you nonetheless virtually. I wanted to make a very brief presentation about the Hague Group and how should we think about international solidarity, how could we possibly think about international law, and really about multilateralism, the United Nations agencies, international institutions that we have at this moment, I think, feeling the lowest level of faith in across the globe. And I mean that from the North and the South, amongst lawyers, amongst students, amongst social movements, and also amongst diplomats. Governments and bureaucrats that are working within governments who find themselves completely shackled and impotent when they're trying to act and move these international institutions. That's the exact frustration with which the Hague Group was born. The Hague Group is a group of 8 countries: South Africa, Colombia, Malaysia, Senegal, Namibia,
Honduras and Bolivia and Cuba coming together to say something very simple, not radical at all, not novel even, and not new. They're not trying to make new law, but essentially to say we have certain obligations in the ongoing genocide and illegal occupation of the Palestinians, and we shall implement those and enforce those obligations within each of our national boundaries. That frustration came from a moment in January this year where there were many such attempts already within the halls of the UN. I had the honor of being in the South African delegation at the incredible historic case that they brought to the ICHR, for example. But a year later, despite the provisional measures, despite the second set of provisional measures, we saw no difference. We saw nothing changing despite us actually having gone to the courts and presented this treasure of evidence on the crimes of the Israeli regime and what needed to be done to stop it. And the same thing repeats itself. International Court of Justice's, with the International Court of Justice's advisory opinion, again, a milestone advisory opinion that's, I know, been talked about here, that lays out obligations, not just for Israel, but obligations for other states. And still, despite it being signed by 124 states, I mean, countries across the world, right? You're seeing that with countries in Europe, countries in Asia, in Latin America, across Africa. But clearly, there's such an impotence to what happens inside the UN that you have countries that are just signing on, leaving the room of the UN without those words meaning anything at all in terms of national legislation. So with that frustration is why the Hague Group was formed, and it looked back, it asked a very simple question: how did we defeat South African apartheid in the movement and the struggle against apartheid? How did we actually get to a point where you had Scandinavian countries be some of the biggest champions in winning a UN Security Council arms embargo? You had a global trade embargo that was won in Delhi, here in my country, 7 years later, with over 75 countries issuing sanctions against the apartheid regime. How did we get to that point? And really the simple answer is collective state action. Just as each of us in all of our movements and unions and social movements, as scholars and lawyers, find ourselves extremely vulnerable alone, so do states. This is one thing I really do want to reiterate, because especially today, I think, we're perhaps all feeling completely demotivated, and this idea that every state is chomping at the bit to sell out the Palestinians. But in all of my conversations, especially with the 8 founding member states of the Hague Group and many more who I can't really name at the moment, the desire to act, the desire to actually enforce obligations is quite high, is higher than we would imagine. Of course, states have been completely complicit and failed all of us as people. There's no question about that. But despite the desire to act, the level of fear is today, especially in this year under the Trump administration, at unprecedented levels. And that's why, again, the Hague Group was formed, because we realized that no single state was willing to act alone. Because when they did, they faced repercussions almost instantly. Whether it's in, made up white genocide claims that South Africa is facing right now by President Trump and increased tariffs, whether you're seeing President Petro, the president of Colombia, be put on the OFAC list, just as other Palestinian human rights organizations were, and his whole family along with his children, and now almost an invasion, a threat of foreign interference and invasion into Colombia, threat of interference into Brazil. We've seen every single country find that it's incredibly dangerous to stand for the Palestinian cause and find themselves on the face of punishment. So collective action where states could stand together and move forward, we believe is the only real integral path forward when we're thinking about government action. So the Hague Group had something very simple in mind. How could we, within our own national boundaries, enforce our obligations and stand for Palestine within our own lands, across our own factories, across our own labor? And I think that's something extremely powerful. Again, our international institutions and our multilateral system absolutely needs to be reformed. But we can do more within our own national boundaries. We can say our factories, our people, our workers will not produce arms that go to Israel to spill the blood of our Palestinian brothers and sisters. We in our courts do promise to prosecute every single Israeli soldier, every single Israeli criminal that comes to our lands and comes to our beaches to have a vacation after conducting a genocide against Palestine in the last 2 years. These are the claims that the Hague Group made. It was founded with three simple commitments on exports, ports, and ports, which is to say that we will respect ICC obligations against Yoav Gallant and Netanyahu. Again, not a radical thing at all. Even a decade ago, I would have said it's not radical. ICC arrest warrants were respected by everyone. In fact, South Africa was really under attack, you all might remember, in the Sudanese case for the same reason. But here in this moment, we saw last year every single government from Poland to France making up rules as we go of immunity for heads of state, about ICC warrants not jurisdiction not applying, about it overstating its role, and now, of course, complete full-blown sanctions against the ICC from the United States government. So the Hague Group States said something very simple, which is to say, as members of the Rome Statute, as members who are party to the International Court of Justice's obligations, we will respect these arrest warrants, and then expanded that in the Bogota Declaration to say we will apply universal jurisdiction. And here's something extremely interesting for us, because universal jurisdiction doesn't have to apply only to individuals. It certainly shouldn't apply only to the top two actors in the Zionist regime, but it can apply also to companies. This is something that has been done in the past. If Spain accepts universal jurisdiction, for example, for Pinochet, as it did, you remember in the case of the Chilean dictator who was captured on European land with the activation of universal jurisdiction, the same can be done for a bank like Santander. The same can be done for companies like Booking.com and Airbnb that operate in other lands, but enabling the occupation, illegal occupation of Palestine. The second is ports and exports. I really want to stress this. Even though some of the Hague Group states and all of the Global South states that do want to do more, that do want to join in these collective efforts, are not the biggest exporters of arms, there is no way that any of these arms are getting to Israel, that are getting to Palestine without passing through our land, without passing through our ships and our ports. So Malaysia, being the first one with the most comprehensive maritime directive, really inspired the rest of the group to say, of course, we should also not be transferring arms. That then got expanded from arms to military fuel. That then got expanded to dual-use items, because we did not want any single part to be transferred through our ports only to reach the lands of Palestine and become guns and weapons that are once again used in this genocide. Where are we today, and 9 months in? I believe that a lot more can be done. The obligations under the ICHR advisory opinion are long. As we've seen, they're incredibly ambitious. They go from complete sanctions to tax freezes, asset freezes, to accountability. We should begin in this moment where the genocide has not stopped, absolutely has not stopped, still immediately start focusing on accountability. Have immigration screenings. It is incredibly easy to have a Gaza Accountability Directive, a Hague Group Immigration Accountability Directive adopted by 70 states, 80 states. These states do not have to be members of the Hague Group to say we will hold war criminals accountable. But the collective action, the collective nature of these implementation of the enforcement is precisely what will shame the countries that are treating international law in this moment as essentially words on a page that don't mean anything once you exit the UN building in New York, or once you exit the UNHRC building in Geneva, and going back to business as usual in their own national governments. The people of the world have already done the effort. They've already done the work in making sure that Palestine is a key issue in domestic politics in multiple countries around the world. And now we need to make sure that our international institutions play that same role, that every word that is just a talk shop that doesn't transfer to commitments becomes a mark of shame against every single country. And I believe it can be done, and the Hague Group should grow from 8 members to 18 members to 80 members, because only when it becomes big, only when there are more numbers to our side, will this logic of isolation, will this logic of punishment that is being used against us instead of against Israel, will finally be reversed. And those that are the murderous regime and its enablers will find themselves alone and isolated when they try to punish the few states that are standing up for, again, not radical, simply enforcement of international law.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Barcha.
Thank you very much.
It's an amazing intervention. Thank you. إذا فارتشا يعني حكت لنا عن تجربة مجموعة لاهاي وكيف أن التضامن الأممي ليس فقط على المجموعات التضامن أو المجموعات الشعبية، ولكن دور الحكومات، حكومات الدول في إنفاذ التضامن الأممي مع قضية فلسطين لإجبار إسرائيل على القيام بالتزاماتها وكذلك التزامات الدول الثالثة اتجاه الجرائم التي تحصل على أرض فلسطين وباتجاه إحقاق حقوق الشعب الفلسطيني.
وأهمية استخدام مختلف الأدوات كالحصار الاقتصادي، الحصار العسكري، عدم إمداد إسرائيل بالأسلحة، وكذلك الاختصاص العالمي وهو اختصاص كل دولة للقيام بمحاسبة سواء الشركات المتواطئة أو المسؤولة عن بعض الجرائم في فلسطين. Thank you Varcha again. الآن معنا 5 دقائق أو 7 دقائق ربما للأسئلة، 7 دقائق، وبعدها مضطرين نبلش في السيشن اللي بعده، في الجلسة اللي بعدها. مين بحب يسأل؟ تفضل.
مرحبا.
Hello.
اسمي عدنان الجولاني.
My name is Adnan Julani, Director of PASIA, the Palestinian Academy Organization for International Studies in Jerusalem. I've seen the interventions within the first or this session. There's some kind of understandable pessimism regarding the UN resolution issued last night or yesterday. My question is kind of an understandable pessimism, but could there be a certain dynamics taking place on the ground while enforcing or implementing this resolution, whether by a stabilization force or by the reconstruction, the best interests of the Palestinian people, that would bring back the leadership, the leading to the Palestinian people, the legitimate leadership of the Palestinian people, our destiny or fate to be under the trusteeship endlessly. Dr. Dalal. Thank you. I'm not a pessimistic person, however, from political realism, we can't read this resolution, but far from the international legitimacy, starting with the 841, the East Jerusalem resolutions, 234. Even the two-state solution, the 1967 borders were not mentioned in the resolution. And that's our reading is from a realistic point of view that is far from what protects or maintains the international law to the Palestinian rights. Your question is very important. Today, as a Palestinian, I don't have options. I have facts on the ground. They are imposing these facts on my ground. We can build. Yes, we can build on that, but not given the mindsets that we have or the mechanisms that we have. Let me speak frankly, today they need to reactivate the democratic process, the ballots, the elections, so that you can reach out to the people who are the good representation, political and representation, and to use the cultural diplomacy, the public diplomacy, the international law diplomacy, as general, the individuals, students, academia, and the right positions in order to be able to promote the Palestinian discourse and to Palestinian vision at the international arenas, and not just saying yes and accept everything, accept all the initiatives. Thank you.
إذا ممكن أجاوب بالإنجليزي كمان.
I can also answer in English.
I think we have to understand like how the ISF is defined, also how the governance of Gaza is defined in this plan. And there's no room for optimism. I think there's ways that we can resist this, and there's ways that eventually we can also still ask somehow for some level of accountability and oversight mechanisms. That I think this is where some countries that have approved this plan with caution, like Russia and China, possibly some Arab countries
would see that it still needs to be defined in a way that's not too horrific, but the plan is horrific. The ISF, as it's planned now, it's basically external forces, soldiers from other countries that would come and try to fight our own people. The mandate is this one, is how do you prevent any form of Palestinian resistance on the ground? That's their mandate. It's not to protect the people. And I think the political faction said it, like, it would be okay to have a force at the borders that is internationally mandated by the UN. There's been civil society calling for a uniting for peace mechanism, which is from the General Assembly. So alternatives exist, but the way that they're thinking this force is very, very dangerous. It's basically external control and crashing the resistance and the Palestinian control in Gaza. The second thing about the governance is that effectively the Board of Peace is deciding. And they're conditioning eventually a path to Palestinian self-determination, to some reforms. And again, we've been there before. You know, it's not, our rights are not conditional. And they're trying to impose on the PA and on the Palestinians to be the ones compromising. And again, as Dr. Dalal said, Israel gets away with everything. There's nothing about the responsibility, nothing about the need for reparations, because they need to pay. The EU again will be asked to pay the bill, the donors, of what Israel has destroyed. So nothing in this plan is good. Now it's upon us to work and to continue dialogue with some of these very complicit people. It's unfortunate, but a lot of these countries that we're in dialogue with in the EU, etc., are effectively complicit, but there is ways that I think we can push and I think changing now the reality that's unfolding in front of us.
Thank you, Ines. I see one question. تفضلي.
My question is
سريعا.
Yeah.
سؤال واحد لأنه مضطرين بعدها على 1:10 بالضبط نبلش الجلسة اللي بعدها. تفضلي.
My question is for Ines. So you've mentioned that we have to start small and then go big with reparation and organizing and everything. But as it was mentioned that people are controlled mostly by fear. I've seen a lot of scattered efforts around students, academics in the West Bank, where they've tried to try to unify efforts internationally and locally. But these have been eliminated or kind of controlled by fear, controlled by elimination, direct elimination, force, physical force sometimes. To eliminate these efforts. So how would that, you've discussed that we have to try to stop from discussing the problem, rather try to fight for the solution or try to work on the solution. But how is the solution possible when all of this internal forces enforced? Also, as you said that, which was also mentioned here, that these international temporary solutions sometimes turn temporary, as we say, usually lead to kind of delays or permanent actions. And how, and that's for the case for Gaza, it's in a really delicate situation right now. It's not as, I could say it's less in the West Bank, but it's kind of less, it's more delicate. So how would it be possible to be able to find these temporary solutions that would be permanent and raise a Palestinian voice to this organizing? This is a solution. It's a labeled solution, but physically,
شكرا ميس.
logically,
أتوقع السؤال واضح.
Yeah, I think the question is.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Very summarizing, but I'm happy to continue this conversation. There's ways to mitigate risks, right? And so, first of all, there's ways that you can organize that don't look political, although it is political. Everything is political. Because again, if you try to bring milk into Gaza, this is political. So that's one. And mitigating risks using digital tools and also Palestinians outside, right? And so again, trying to diffuse the risk for Palestinians inside Palestine because the elimination and the risks are very high, into trying to build solidarity with solidarity groups and Palestinians outside that can support your efforts. and they can bear a bit more risks than you can. And so I think this is two ways. Of course, you can unpack this, you know, and using online tools and things to digital spaces. So I think we can unpack this, but I think it's important to recognize what you're saying is right. And I think, yeah, I'll stop here. And on the second question, you're right. I think just as we have seen with Oslo, I think the ad hoc liaison committee and the architecture around how donors and Israel is at the table deciding for the Palestinians and their infrastructure, this can become permanent, which is the very risk, right? That this becomes the facts on the ground and the reality. So I think this is, again, like a political and diplomatic conundrum, because we have to not let this be the new normal. And I think this is the traditional path of states, is to accept this as the only way. And this is why so many states accepted this plan. Not that they think it's a good plan, it's just the only one on the table. And so I think it's up to us, but also to fight and resist, to have an alternative, and to see, to show the world that there are alternatives possible. It's neither resumption of the genocide or the Trump's plan. There are alternatives possible.
Thank you, Ines.
يعطيكم العافية وشكرا كثير.
Hello everyone. In the interventions, there were important things regarding a unified national project that represents the population. Nas talked about the importance of representation of the Palestinian people wherever they are. My question to you is, what should we do with the PA and the PLO? Are they part of this new representation? Do we need to restore or to put it aside and start from scratch once again? So where do you think this should go? This is for Dr. Bassem. We can say to Dr. Halabak. Okay. In my own opinion, the PLO is like a sword, is like a knife in a hand. It's either cut the vegetables and meat and do your own meal, or you have to cut your fingers. Meaning that the PLO is something unclear or ambiguous and able to be employed by any party, starting with the most honest Palestinian freedom fighter to Trump. These can do arguments that the PLO is important and we do need it. But for what purposes? If the PLO wants to be brought to make the drafts or the scenarios that we have legal, it would become part of the complexities or and a great challenge to the Palestinians. And thus, when a Palestinian want to put a list of their enemies, I think they might think about putting the PLO as one of these enemies. Now, if the PLO takes another direction and this doesn't have any promising indicators, because there are no elections, there's no action, there's no communication, there's no presence, there's a corpse or a body that is representing the Palestinian people, representing the 15 millions. Nobody knows anything about it. It's kidnapped by a group of executives or senior positions. We should not fool ourselves. This brings us to a question about the legitimacy of this entity. Any entity that does not take its authority from the people or the would be under a question mark. And therefore we have a homework that we have to do as Palestinians about determining the situation or the status of PLO, if there is a chance for reforms or not. And if we fail to do that, I'm afraid this would be outside the situation. Thank you, Dr. Bassem. Thank you, Dr. Dalal and Dr. Anas. Thank you, Varsha. Thank you all. Only 1 minute for those who want to grab a cup of coffee, because we will start the session immediately. Thank you.
Recording stopped.